To look for a job, it's a job itself. When someone goes for an interview, you don't expect to ask them about their family unless it's stated somewhere that that family is going to be important in the role that you're going to work. I lost my job despite having a PhD. In this episode, I'm going to share with you an update of what has happened ever since I lost my job. So if you're new here, welcome. My name is Faith. I have a PhD in biotechnology and virology. Virology is the study of viruses. Having gone through the pandemic, I think everyone knows what a virus is. In this episode, I'm going to share with you an update of what has happened ever since I lost my job, despite having a PhD. But before I do that, let me thank everyone who has watched my previous video where I opened up about losing my job, despite having a PhD and having the highest qualification there is. Many of the people asked me if I have working experience. Yes, I have 10 years of working experience and I've worked in different places. I worked in the UK, I worked in Uganda, my home country, and I've also worked in Australia. So I have 10 years of working experience, but even with those 10 years of working experience, I still lost my job. When I opened up and shared about losing my job, I was sharing with you the realities that exist in the current economic situation around the globe. Having gone through the pandemic, we saw the need for scientists to generate the therapeutics, which are treatments, the vaccines, which prevent diseases, and also ways in which you can stop the spread of diseases, especially the infectious diseases that usually do not know any borders. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a breakdown of what has happened ever since I lost my job. This is my 6th month of me not having a job, and that's the reality. To look for a job and find a job that you want to do is actually a job in itself. Meaning, I have to make sure I tailor my resume or my CV to meet the job description and the ideal candidate they're looking for that job. On a rough estimate, it takes me around 2 days to apply for a job that is in my field, whereby I need to articulate all the components that the job is asking for in my cover letter and my resume. So it's been a job in itself. Around March, I found a job that I was interested in. It had my qualifications. It was looking for a person who had my skills, my experience, my expertise, and everything. When I looked at the job, I saw that was a job I could take up and do, and it would also help me progress in my career. It was a senior scientist job, and I was so thrilled to apply for that job. So I sat on my computer, I did the needful, I applied for the job, tailored all my documents to meet the job description and the person they were looking for, because I had the skills. I got to the shortlist. I was shortlisted for the job. I ended up having a telephone screening interview with the manager for that research group that I was going to work in if I'd gotten a job, and that went well. So from that, the human resource manager reached out to me and gave me an opportunity to go for an interview, which was supposed to be a face-to-face interview. So I went for the face-to-face interview, and when I did the interview, it was actually the longest interview I've ever done in my entire life. It was a 2-hour job interview. I loved the job interview in that they gave me a chance to talk to them about what I've done, my expertise, my motivation, and everything that has led me to where I am as a scientist. It was more of a formal but kinda informal interview. That interview went on for 1 hour with the people on the panel, and after the 1 hour interview, I was given a chance to meet the colleagues and the juniors whom I would be supervising if I'd gotten that job. So I meet these guys, we have a chat, and it went lovely. I loved the whole experience of the interview. It was my first time having an interview structured that way. And before I could leave that interview, another guy who was supposed to be in the interview, who didn't make it for the interview, comes in, and the lady who had invited me for the interview tells me, oh yeah, there's someone else who wants to interview you, since they could not make it for the morning interview you just had. So I was like, oh yeah, okay. Since I'm the one looking for a job, that's okay. So I sit with this guy. He has my cover letter, my resume. He's looking at it and he's telling me, okay. He was asking me more of the basic things I've done. Some of the things I've done in my career, I did them at the start of my career. And if you understand that if you have a PhD, most times what happens is there's so many skills you learn on your journey to getting your PhD. and some of them end up being relevant and others end up being irrelevant, but deep down you know exactly how to do that work. I hope this makes sense. So he asked me about this technique. It's called an ELISA. It's called enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. It's basically used in finding out antibody concentrations. It's used to determine usually concentrations of antibodies or concentrations of the substrates that you're working with. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that assay. And I tell him, yeah, I've done this. I've actually taught university students how to do this technique. I know what it means. I know how it's done, but I've not been doing it in my previous job because it was not relevant to the research I was doing in my previous role. So that ends. And one of the other questions he also asked me is, do you have a family? And I'm like, yeah, I have a family. I have 2 children. I have a husband, and yeah, I'm a married woman and I have a family. So he asked me, what is it having a family and having a job? In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this question is strange. Why would you be asking me about whether I have a family? Is it really important in this role that I'm going to be doing? And I tell him, yeah, I'm a parent. I have almost a 2-year-old and almost a 5-year-old child. And my children have led me to who I am, and I've learned a lot as being a mother to them. Then the other question he asks me is like, how come you have a career gap between 2019 and 2021? So I tell him 2019, I finished my PhD. And at the end of that year, I had my first child, my son. 2020, the whole country or the entire world was closed. So I took 1 year off to raise my child. So I didn't look for a job that year because I concentrated in being a parent. So I give him all the details, which are more personal, because on an interview, I don't expect you to be asking me about my family. But since I'm the one looking for a job, I'm like, okay, let me just answer this question. Then he asked me also some other questions, which I found were really irrelevant in a job interview. And the fact that I'd already had an interview with the rest of the people who had given details about what I'd done and how I'd gotten to where I am in my career, I didn't see the need to have another person interview me. If this person had wanted to be there for an interview, he would have made it a point that he appeared in the interview where the rest of the people were interviewing me. So at the 2-hour mark, the lady who had brought me in for the interview calls me and is like, oh yeah, thank you so much for your time. We shall be in touch in 2 weeks. So I come back home. I found the interview was not hard because I knew everything and had articulated everything that the job description wanted in my cover letter and in my resume. So I come home, I wait for 2 weeks. There's nothing coming out the end. So I write to the lady and I'm asking, thank you so much for interviewing me the last time, but I'm asking what's the progress on my application? You told me I'll be hearing from you in 2 weeks' time. Then she writes to me and tells me, oh yeah, our human resource was on holiday, but I'm going to get to her and she'll be able to get back to you. That was cool. But the other also red flag I saw from this organization was the fact that when I was having this interview, there was no human resource present in the interview I had. The interview I had, basically I had it with other scientists and other heads of the department that I was going to work in if I'd gotten the job. Which is also strange because if it's a big organization, many times you have to make sure there's a human resource to represent the employer. The reason why organizations have human resource managers or human resource specialists is because those people come in to bridge the gap between the employee and the employer. And the fact that I had an interview with people who do not understand anything when it comes to human resource management, it's privy to ask questions which are relevant to an interview. When someone goes for an interview, you don't expect to ask them about their family unless it's stated somewhere that that family is going to be important in the role that you're going to work. So finding this guy asking me about details of my family, how I find being a parent and working, and how parenthood has helped me in my career. And I'm like, that's not relevant. The most relevant question that could have been asked was if I was a parent or if there's any flexibility that is needed for me to work as a parent. That would have been something I understood. But asking me if being a parent makes me a good scientist, I'm like, okay, this is strange. I found it to be more of a very prying question instead of it being a question that was relevant to the job I was applying for. So the human resource was not present on my interview. And what happens? This lady tells me the human resource has also not been around. She's been on holiday. A few minutes later, after I'd spoken to that lady, I get a message telling me, "Dear Faith, thank you so much for application for the role of senior scientist with this company. On this occasion, your application has been unsuccessful. We had a high caliber application base for this role, and there were other candidates more suited to the position. Due to the high volume of the applications we received, we are not in position to provide individual responses to each applicant. Please continue to monitor our careers page for future opportunities and apply directly for a specific role should it fit your capabilities. Kind regards, then them. That was a message I got from the ATS system. So after a while, I got this email telling me I was not fit for the role. Hi Faith, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to personally reach out to express my thanks for your interest in the role at this company. We appreciate your time and effort invested in submitting your application and participating in the interview process. After careful consideration and a thorough review of all applications, I regret to inform you that we have decided not to progress with your application at this time. While your qualifications and experiences are commendable, we believe that another applicant would be a more suitable fit for this role. Please keep in mind that this decision was not a reflection of your skills and abilities. We firmly believe that you have valuable strength that could be a great match for other opportunities. And fit in a sense that they could not give me more detail. So I'm thinking, if I could have a 2-hour interview with a company and I've told you everything that I did, it would be an important thing if you've given me 2 hours to interview with you. That means you can give me a detailed explanation as why you see me not to be fit for this role, not just sending me a generic email from the ATS system. Because if I could interview with a company for 2 hours, you can spare 5 minutes to write me an email and tell me, you know what, the reason why you are found not to be fit was because you're not culturally fitting into our organization, or you don't have the skills we're looking for, or we already had a person who qualified this role and we just needed to advertise for it, or anything. But do not send me a generic email telling me how you feel my skills are commendable, but you feel I'm not competent enough to do this role. I find that to be demeaning to a person of my caliber. I don't want to come off as a person who is very entitled, but it's the least a company can do to give you constructive feedback when it comes to an application. By the time I have a PhD, there's so much I've done on my career journey that an update of you telling me how I'm not fit for a role because you think I'm not fit for a role after you've spent 2 hours interviewing me does not really cut it. When I got this message, I was disappointed in the organization that they could not provide me constructive feedback, especially the fact that I interviewed with a scientist. They should have come back and told me, oh yeah, the reason why you were not selected was because of this, as them the scientist. If there was not human resource from the start of the interview and all the things that we went through in the interview process, the human resource really does not have much they can say about my application because I didn't interview with them face to face. It would have been better for the scientist I interviewed with to give me her feedback, because she's the one who interviewed me, and I would believe as them as a panel, they came up with a consensus that I was not fit for a role. At least they would have given me more elaborate feedback on my application, other than telling me that I'm not a fit. So I'm thinking I'm not a fit culturally, I'm not a fit skill-wise, I'm not a fit how I came up with my energy, because as this guy was asking me these condescending questions of how does it feel to be a parent and work, I'm thinking, is that really worth it? I asked him a question, are you a parent yourself? But he could not answer the question because it's like, oh yeah, I'm interviewing you, you don't have a right to ask me a question. And I'm like, okay, this is strange. So the reason why I'm sharing this is to tell you that some companies may look good on paper. You look at the company and you see, okay, this company meets what I'm looking for as my potential employer. But when you get in, there are all these red flags that you're seeing. The first red flag was having an interview for 1 hour, then deciding to give me another interview for another 30 minutes with that other guy who didn't show up at the start of my interview. The second red flag was the fact that there was no human resource manager on an interview where you're recruiting someone who's going to work as a senior. And the third red flag was the human resource coming in and giving me a generic email as everyone else, having taken me through the interview process for 3 hours, because I had a 30 minutes telephone interview, then I had a 1 hour face-to-face with the other panel members, then I had another 30 minutes with that other guy who shows up after I'd finished the interview with the previous members, then I also had another 30 minutes with the team. So those were 3 hours of my time to get a job that I end up not getting, of which I don't end up getting concrete feedback on my interview process and the role that I'd gone for. So that was a job I want to highlight on my journey of getting back into the workforce. And one thing I learned from that interview is that when you see a red flag with a company, don't settle. However much your company may look good on paper, on their website, on what you see on their LinkedIn, if you reach there and you feel like, don't settle for it. And luckily, I didn't get the role, and I'm still applying for other roles. There are some other roles that I've applied for whereby I'm waiting for feedback. And when that feedback comes in, I'll be sure to share my update on the next episode. So if you've loved this episode, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. And also, you can find the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Overcast, Amazon Music. Anywhere you get audio podcasts, you can find the Frame Solutions there. And if this has resonated with you in any form, leave me a comment. Let's get talking in the comments. Lastly, future-proof your career. You can future-proof your career by gaining life skills that you can use to do your thing, by also determining what exactly you want out of your career. Do not settle for a career that does not fit what you're looking for. And if you're stuck and need any help in your career, download my blueprint to career clarity. A link will be left in the description of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and catch you in the next episode. Bye.